Hey everyone, it's Dave Asprey, Bulletproof Executive. Today's cool fact of the day is that the origin of the phrase bring home the bacon goes all the way back to the year 1104 to a small English town called Dunmow. In the Dunmow flitch trial, couples are promised a flitch or a side of bacon if they can satisfy a judge and a jury of 6 bachelors and 6 maidens that during the last 12 months and one day they have not wished themselves unmarried. So these bacon trials are still held every 4 years, and your next chance to prove your love and get your bacon is in 2016. And I'm not sure that I'm going to start saying, hey, do you have a flitch of bacon? But apparently that's correct. If you're watching this or following this on YouTube, hey, thanks a ton for taking a look at the new official How to Make Bulletproof Coffee video online. It just hit 50,000 views, and I would just love it if it hit 100,000 views. So please check out the Bulletproof Executive channel and just click like if you actually like it. This podcast is available there as well. Today's guest is Dr. Grace Liu. You may know her as Dr. D.G. Animal Pharm. And I first met Grace back, about 3-4 years ago with Richard Nicolai at dinner at my favorite steakhouse in Silicon Valley called Burke's. And they do serve a grass-fed steak, but it's only the filet mignon. They also serve oysters. In fact, I watched Richard Nicolai throw up an oyster. It was very exciting that night. If you don't know Richard Nicolai, Richard is, he runs, what's Richard's blog? I'm blanking on it. Grace?
Free the Animal.
Thank you. Free the Animal. It was like Free the something, but it's not Free the Paleo. There we go. So anyway, Richard's a well-known guy. And Richard's big thing lately has been resistant starch and how maybe this is the missing link in paleo, and other paleo figures have talked about it. I've done an experiment on myself with it. And Grace is here, who has a serious background in the pharmaceutical world, who writes a really technical and just really good blog about like the various scientific, nutritional, and pharmacological ins and outs of our health, including 4 years of plant biology. So you'll basically find a ton of info on her blog, and you'll also find a ton of info in this interview with her. So Grace, welcome to the show. I'm really stoked to have you on.
Oh, thank you. I am too. I've been looking forward to this.
Now, one of the things that gives you biohacker cred in my book is that you lost 50 pounds of fat by eating a paleo-like diet, and you even got nutrition certified by Robb Wolf.
That's true.
That's so cool. So anyone who's lost, more than about 25 pounds by hacking their health has gone through a personal journey that makes them more aware of, what they're capable of and what others are capable of. And the fact that you have real scientific training backing you up is also really impressive.
Oh, thank you.
You are also in some remote part of the world. Where are you today?
I've been in China. This is our 3rd year. We're expats out here in Shanghai.
So you're actually in Shanghai proper?
Yeah. Normally we live in Bay Area. We go back every summer.
Lovely. And I'm on Vancouver Island, so it's some time for you. I'm not sure when. For me, it's kind of middle of the night, so I'm wearing my cool biohacker shades, keeping the lights a little bit reddish and dim. So if you're all watching this on video, you know why. I look a little bit more
I love your cave.
Yeah, it kind of looks more like a brothel at this time of night because of the red lights, but hey, we'll go with it.
Hey, I don't mind. You look great. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
It's been a long time. Yeah.
It has. You're looking very healthy too, which is cool because in Shanghai, man, I was there a few months ago and the air was so thick. I'd never seen it like that in my other visits. So are you feeling it in your lungs or are you good?
It's all new. It wasn't really so bad, but I think the industries have really cranked up.
Wow.
And some days I do feel a little tight, but it's, yeah.
Okay. Well, let's just jump right in about resistant starch because a lot of people, unless you're like really up to speed on the paleo side of things, you probably haven't heard of resistant starch. And there are 4 kinds of it. So for people who are driving in their cars listening who know something about eating maybe but aren't really up to speed, starch, resistant starch, soluble fiber, insoluble fiber, just give us the rundown from a pharmacology, nutrition kind of point of view.
Okay. Actually, there's a lot of plant biology behind resistant starch. The way resistant starch is molecularly designed, it's helical. It's a lot like our DNA, which is one of the most compact pieces of machinery, actually. And my theory is that have high protein and are able to protect their little plant babies have higher amounts of RS. If you look at it, resistant starch is higher in whole grains, whole beans, whole lentils, tubers, anything underground storage related. And this is very similar to C4 and C3 actually, in terms of the content of inulin and other fibers like fructans. I think it's nature's way of being an antifreeze, because during the last couple millennia, the way these plants could survive is if their babies, could withstand cold and have high cold tolerance. So these fructans, during the cold, this is how they have increased their way of survival. So RS1 is in the outside of a plant baby, like a tuber or a bean or whole grain. Those are the main ones for the outside. And it's very hard to break. Our enzymes can't break them down. And some of the microbial ones can. And then RS2 is just starch, resistant starch. Usually it's the raw one, uncooked. So the big popular one is the white powder potato starch. Yeah, straight RS2. RS3 is cooked. So it gels out into usually a liquid substrate. And then during cooling, it congeals up. And it makes it a little harder for, so it's a carbohydrate that raises our blood sugar. We call this net carbs, right? But once it congeals, it's actually a fiber, and we can't break it. Our enzymes from our mouth and our pancreatic enzymes can't break it down. And
that was RS3, right?
Yeah, RS3. Okay. And the thing about RS3 is that if you reheat it, or it's cooled and then cooled and reheated, multiple times you do this, the harder it is actually for the enzymatic degradation process by the microbial amylases. So believe it or not, it becomes more and more of a fiber. So parboiled rice is like one of them. They pick the rice and they heat it right, they cook it right on the field or something, and then they cool it, and then it's packaged up. And that actually has a higher amount of RS total because of the RS3 compared to other cooked rice.
And then what about RS4?
So the last form is RS4. It actually doesn't exist in nature. It's almost like a synthetic pharmaceutical. It's worked in the factory or chemical lab. So they add some kind of molecular moiety for the enzymes to break down. They do this to a lot of pharmaceuticals. Usually to make it really, really long lasting, they add a halogen. Drugs can't be broken down by our body. We can't eliminate them. These actually are the most toxic drugs actually with the halogen group. Reactive species. But for food, I don't actually remember the moieties that they stick on. Could be methyl or something, but it just makes it harder for the enzymes to break down. They tend to last longer.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we have, and this is funny because in the Bulletproof diet, like a protein is not a protein. The difference between an egg white and spider venom, they're both proteins. They're just different. They do different things. And now we talk about carbs, and then of course we have sugar, we have fructose, we have all these other things and then starch. But it turns out with starch, we don't really have starch. We have 4 kinds of resistant starch and then some non-resistant starch, right?
Yeah, and then it all depends on temperature and breed, and it's all way more complicated than what I learned in school or nutritional science as an undergrad.
Okay, well, so let's zoom in on the resistant starches. Why should anyone care about resistant starch? Like, what's the big deal? Isn't it just another kind of fiber?
Okay. Yeah, it's not just another kind of fiber. Probably, if you look at the evolutionary data, which is actually really strong and really big, our ancestors probably ate resistant starch in the form of underground tubers for millennia, if not even billions of years, perhaps.
So were they eating like raw yams you're talking about, or was this something else?
Probably a non-toxic thing. I mean, I don't know actually all the varieties of yams. I know some of them are kind of toxic, but there are non-toxic sedge nuts, which are like the tiger nuts. These grew all over Egypt and Africa. They're apparently kind of delicious. The Egyptians were one of the first to do crops, and they did crops of papyrus. They didn't just make this paper, but they were eating them. It's like one of the first crops on Earth, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they're nutritious. They're full of protein and all kinds of goodies. So underground storage units also include even wild carrots. They have RS in them, as well as all kinds of other kind of fibers. If you look at cattails and even nuts like acorns, you eat a fair share of some nuts, right? They have a little bit of RS in them. Yeah. So if you have a problem, I don't know if you have a problem with nuts, but in the long, primitive days, toxic. And but there were some that were not. So, for millions of years, I believe a lot of our ancestors, including our primate ones, even baboons now, they learned how to dig underground, sedge nuts and tiger nuts and other underground storage tubers. So we were not the first. We followed actually primates, and through evolution, we were able to get more carbs this way. There was a shift. Primates probably got at least half their energy from fermenting fiber. I mean, they just really don't have much in terms of pancreatic enzymes to break down carbs. They got a lot of their energy from fat, but it was from microbial fermentation. The microbes were breaking it all down and then converting it to fat.
Yep.
But our brain got bigger, and as you know, we have a brain in our gut, and if both are broken, that's a big problem. It ties in with the gut. So underground storage organs, they're full of resistant starch. And there's no doubt in my mind that we've evolved probably eating them. And if you look at the primary core microbiome, the microbiota, the main ones that are associated with anti-inflammation and high amounts of butyrate production, which is one of these saturated fats, short-chain saturated fats, their preferred food is actually butyrate. They love to make butyrate, but they make it from resistant starch. If you give them different kind of fibers, it's a resistant starch that they will break down immediately, super fast, ultra fast.
It was that butyrate thing that got me all excited, because one of the reasons that I put butter in Bulletproof coffee is butter is one of the biggest dietary sources of butyrate, other than if you eat fiber that ferments in your gut. And a lot of people, I find, don't ferment fiber very well in their gut to make butyrate. Possibly.
Do you think for millions of years we were eating butter, though? I'm not sure. See, that's where I ran into one of my first evolutionary quandaries.
No, of course we didn't. And the problem there is that in a modern world, we do all sorts of things that we probably shouldn't have done, and we've changed the soil and the gut biome probably permanently. So I've noticed that I benefit and others benefit both cognitively and even in gut health by having more butter in the diet. And so that was kind of okay, does it work? And certainly we didn't evolve to do almost any of the things we're doing, even sitting here at night talking over Skype.
Yeah, possibly. So evolution plays a big role because diet drives everything, right?
Yeah.
We've seen with all kinds of examples, Darwinian examples. Diet's one of the biggest drivers. And maybe we're changing. I mean, our diet, there's some theories that our brain has shrunk. Our cranium is about 10% smaller.
Oh, wow. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, you didn't come up with that? We need to upgrade that and make our brains and craniums a little more bulletproof. Something has really changed. But I don't doubt, the diet we follow will protect our ancestors. I mean, our children and our,
Well, that was the whole Better Baby book. But one of the problems that I ran into in that is that some of the recommendations can make your child's head so large it won't fit through the birth canal. And it's like we have the power to do it, but we have to also have moms who are well suited to having large-headed babies, or we have to address it right after the baby comes out and crank up the fish oil and stuff like that. So it's kind of becoming a limiting factor. How big of a hole do you have to go through?
What a wonderful problem to have.
Isn't it great?
I'm
pretty stoked on it.
But because every generation our hips are getting more narrow, huh?
Yeah.
There's been some studies about that. Yeah, it has to do with vitamin D, sunlight, grains.
Yeah, it's just not right.
Vitamin D. Yeah.
So,
it's interesting. It's interesting you bring up butyrate because Stanley Bruskowski, right? Brzezinski. His famous, cure for a lot of refractory brain cancers. It's actually a butyrate derivative. Yeah, you see. And who gets cancer? People with broken guts. Their body's no longer able to ferment or move butyrate.
Yes.
And their brain's broken and their gut's broken. It goes hand in hand.
Well, so let's talk about how the body processes starch then into butyrate and the other ways it processes starch. So if you're the sort of average person listening to this and maybe you ate some mashed potatoes, which are full of starch but have almost no resistant starch, what happens in the gut? Walk through what would happen, and then let's walk through what would happen with a resistant starch in order to help, or maybe even a vegetable to help you make butyrate.
Okay, that's great. There's many kinds of potatoes. I mean, all the heirloom potatoes from South America, Europe, blah, blah, blah. They're far different than the American monoculture white potato, right? Mm-hmm. So if we're talking about just a regular white potato, that GI is actually higher than table sugar. It'll raise blood sugars faster and higher than table sugar. So if we're talking about that one, that's clearly worse than shoveling table sugar or snorting it. But the way we break it down, okay, if we're eating like mashed potatoes from a white, normal American potato, we're chewing, our amylases start working on breaking down the starches. Depending on your genetic background, you may have a high copy of amylase or a low copy. People who tend to eat more amylase in their diet, like tropical, and probably my ancestors because I'm Chinese, you're going to have more amylase. You're going to start, as soon as it starts hitting the pavement, it starts getting broken down. By the time it hits your stomach, right, and intestines, there's been massive digestion going on, usually if there's a healthy gut. Anytime there's an unhealthy gut, like heartburn or GERD, any kind of SIBO, small intestinal bowel overgrowth, anyone taking NSAIDs, this is breaking down the gut, there's a backflow. Some people don't, there's already some brokenness and you're not going to get a full digestion. And I see this actually in a lot of the functional medicine panels. The pancreatic enzymes are like, elastase is below 500, 100, 200, it's pathetic. Okay, anyway, so if it hits the small intestines and everything's go, then all the complex carbs will be broken down from disaccharides, complex carbs, down to the simple glucose, and then we can get it upregulated into our body, straight across that one cell barrier, and across glucose transport and all these things. And then it goes into our, it goes into triglycerides, and then it goes into our bloodstream through the lymph. Okay, that's just the potato. And then any fiber left, be much if it's a white American potato, then it would be shuttled down to the colon for the cecum and the large intestines for microbial fermentation. Okay, now let's say you have in there, you either put 1 or 2 tablespoons of psyllium or 1 or 2 tablespoons of potato starch while it's cool. The temperature makes a big difference, right? We can easily make potato starch or any other kind of raw RS cooked, and then it's going to raise our blood sugars. And then, so for the white potato and mouth and small intestines, we're seeing the blood sugar go because the net carbs is exactly almost as much as the grams of carbs. Well, not exactly. There's some leeway, but with fluids and stuff. So it will go up. Now, if you have potato starch fiber or psyllium, they both buffer the way they lower the GI of the carb food, and so we get this dampening. The blood sugars don't rise as rapidly. The funny thing about potato starch is I don't fully understand it all. I don't know if it's been totally broken down. Some of the receptors that, if we start getting fermentation going on, butyrate around the cecum and small intestine, so this is like an hour and a half into digestion, it will hit the GPR receptor. It's almost like a PPAR receptor for fish oil. I'm sure you're aware of how omega-3, the mechanism is. It hits.
So, Grace, I'm definitely a huge PPAR fanboy, but I'm pretty sure our listeners just got lost. So, just to assume that A, they're paying attention to the car in front of them, and B, they probably don't know what PPAR is. So, back up just a bit about what's happening. So you had glucose you had the starch break down to glucose in the gut, and there was some fiber left over. And what happened to that fiber? Like, it does some different things.
Okay, so resistant starch, first, like inulin and oligos, and some of the soluble fibers.
The so-called prebiotics that you can buy.
Yeah, they're prebiotics, or they're in a lot of root vegetables and other whole grains and whole beans. The cecum, there's a lot of bacteria in there. It's like a little house. For our favorite little microbes, in case things get wiped out, in a monsoon, this is like the reservoir, like a silo. So the bacteria in the cecum will start doing their little job, making beer or whatever. I'm just kidding. So they start fermenting, and they make saturated fats for us. And one of them, butyrate, the 4-carbon saturated fat. It's like omega-3. It's like another fat. It will bind a receptor. Yeah. And these receptors have been elucidated. One of them is the ketone receptor, GPR109A. Used to be known as puma gene in animals, and there's been various other names, HN something, 7. So I used to be really into this. I thought the only way to access this was ketones, but I was wrong.
So butyrate and ketones access this.
Yeah, because
Bulletproof
ketones.
coffee. Okay.
So ketones is beta hydroxy And in a normal physiologic living, right, we hit butyrate, we hit ketones when we're doing extended exercise, which all humans, I believe, we evolved doing because we had to build houses and carry water and carry babies.
Yep.
And maybe women are a little better for some stuff, while foraging. And then babies for the first 2 weeks of life, and then they switch their metabolism. There's other states, sometimes pregnancy. I had ketones during pregnancy, even though I was eating carbs. So I think there's certain states, like maybe high cortisol states. And that's debatable, how healthy that is long-term, having a high adrenal, high adrenaline and cortisol state. Yeah. But butyrate, and beta-hydroxy butyrate, ketones, of course, they share homology for the receptors they hit, and one is the GPR1 and 9A. The other one is GPR41 and 43. They used to be called some fatty acid kind of receptor. These are huge anti-inflammatory receptors, and it's mainly butyrate and other saturated fats.
They're huge anti-what?
Anti-inflammatory.
Anti-inflammatory. Okay, cool.
Yeah. They work all over the brain, all over the immune system. Essentially, our gut is one long lymphoid tissue. So other than bone marrow and the antibodies we have floating around, our gut is the immune system. 70, 80, even I believe even 90% of our immune system is the gut. So whatever goes on there will completely determine what our food allergies are. Whether the gut is sealed, what's living there, what's modulating it, whether the friendly bacteria that normally live there are there. If they're not there, they are apex predators, and when they're not there, the vermin take over. So we have to have this core commensal microbiota, and we're finding more and more, like in autism studies and ulcerative colitis studies and C. diff colitis studies, we're finding out what is not there, because what brings it in there, we'll talk about that later, but there's a core microbiome, and once they get in, then everything goes away. Autism goes away, C. diff colitis goes away, all the repetitive, weird behavior. I am kind of asking, and I can't tell when my little symptoms come back, if my gut's not doing well, if I don't sleep well. These all affect the gut. Now, finding all these trends in recent studies, and it all has to do with the gut and what the commensals are there.
So you and I are in total agreement that the gut is at the core of an enormous amount of both health problems as well as unlocking some human potential there. But you just said, doing something about autism. I'm speaking at the Autism One conference coming up here, and I'm keenly interested in fixing the gut, both in autistic kids and in autistic adults, and in my own path, having had ADD and the symptoms of Asperger's syndrome and things like that. And there is a gut connection, but are you saying that resistant starch is something that autistic kids would benefit from? What's your take on that?
Okay, that's a loaded question, Dave, because it depends on what's in the small intestines.
Yeah, it is a loaded question, right? And so maybe I was spoon feeding it to you, but okay, so depending on what's in the gut, but if you give yourself resistant starch, how do you know what's in the gut?
Well, you can tell. So if you take resistant starch and you're getting adverse effects, you have something in the gut that shouldn't be there.
Okay.
It's broken. Because evolution-wise, we should tolerate resistant starch, fibers, and anything in food, unless we're like drastically, for some reason, vaccinated against it. And that's what happens. When we have a leaky gut, we vaccinate ourselves, which is retarded. It only happens in modern times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
we should not have gluten and dairy problems, because if our gut is non-permeable or just selectively permeable the way evolution intended, then we would not be putting in all these antigens into our blood and essentially vaccinating ourselves.
Well, even if your gut is non-permeable and you don't have a gluten sensitivity, there's pretty solid studies about gluten reducing blood flow to the brain.
Oh, with those. I mean, I think there was a recent study about ancient spelt, and there wasn't so much issues in even celiac people. I didn't really look at that study, but I believe that it really depends on the quality of the gut, the integrity of the mucosal membrane, the tight junctions, and barriers there.
Well, we'll cut over to my own resistant starch experience, because you might have some comments on that, and then we'll go back to this sort of generalized. Okay, how do you control what's going to grow when you feed it resistant starch? So I consider Richard Nicolai a friend, and I'm a fan, and I just like what he does, and he's just a funny guy, right? And so when he starts writing just pages and pages of all these RS posts that are really well cited, I'm like, oh, this is great. So I read through them. I wrote up a piece on the Bulletproof blog, and I went out and I did my experiment. I'm potato sensitive. I know the lectins bother my joints. So I was like, oh, I'll try potato flour. So I tried potato flour for a few days and I started getting rashes. I'm like, all right, that's fine. I'll do what Richard recommended, which was take potato starch rectally, because it doesn't cause those problems then, but it allows fermentation. And I noticed some improvements when I did that, and I was doing that while I waited for my plantain starch to arrive, which is another common source. I did the plantain starch for 2 weeks, and I started getting hives, and my allergies came back. And they're still back, like 3 months after I did this, where like my seasonal allergies are much worse than they were. And I kind of feel like I didn't really win on this experiment. I didn't even go 30 days on it. I did get my comprehensive stool analysis. I didn't get it right at the end of that. I did it, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks after I finished the experiment. My total saturated or short chain fatty acids were 6.3. So within limits, but kind of towards the lower end of it. And my butyrate was 1.3, and it goes up to 3.8 on the scale. This is from Doctor's Data Labs. So how would you interpret that? You know, I tried 2 different sources of RS. I did try the UCAN stuff, which is another kind. But I was kind of underwhelmed. It made me less happy from a gut perspective, and it made my kids laugh riotously because I couldn't stop farting. So,
Okay.
what's the take on that, Dr. Grace?
Okay. I mean, we've seen a couple failures. They're pretty not very common, but I've seen failures in the way that the health is not recovered. There's still like all these little things, you know, like for instance, Richard's sinuses, once he added the probiotics, I think he properly filled up the commensals that were in the small intestines for them to do their job and clear out and improve the integrity of the barriers, and then improvements that we're seeing. But there are a couple cases like yours as well. People have flares of their arthritis usually. People have had rashes too. Some big bloggers like Fred Hahn, he had immediate problems as well. And that just signals to me that, you know what, these people have intestinal issues. And I love the CDSA, you know, the test that you did, but the problem for me is that they don't accurately describe sometimes what's overgrowing, because they do it by culture. And, you know, all the data pre like 1998, 1999, they're all culture. So back then they thought the gut was full of bifida and lacto, but that was like so wrong. Now they've realized they only got 5%. Like, let's say you got a big elephant and you can touch only one thing and you're blind. You know, if you're just touching like the leg, you totally miss the tusk, the head, the ear, right? So you miss the whole picture. So by looking at a DNA, RNA perspective, you know it's alive. So using, I prefer the test, the Genova Diagnostics. I think I wrote to you about it. That's a much better, preferable test, because you can use the RNA data to know what's alive, and you can kind of tell what's growing. It's not the most, it's imperfect. It's also better to get a urine analysis, so you can know the organic acids and see what's growing out. Because fungus does not culture, as you know, because you're a fungal expert. But I had huge amounts of fungus, and it cannot be cultured out. And if I had gone with the CSA, it would have been totally wrong. But
what kind of urine, fungus? What did you have? Do you know?
It was Candida. Okay. Not any weird species.
It wasn't Candida krusei. It was just Candida albicans, like the kind of run-of-the-mill stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, and there's like thousands of varieties of that one, but okay.
Yeah, and it couldn't tell me the form. Had it like already toxic, you know, or if it was benign. But when it gets to 4+, it's usually kind of not benign. Okay. But with urine, you can kind of tell if it's overgrowing. If it's seeping out into the bloodstream and then thus to the urine, the D-arabinol will be off the chart if you do an organic acids test. And then if you know, usually once the small intestines is, you know, by yeast, you know, you got everything else opportunistic growing there, because the yeast only grow there when the commensals are gone. So either by low carb or by antibiotics or gastroenteritis. I mean, there's so many, and eliminate these commensals in the small intestines, and they're really the guard for the small intestines.
Well, in my case, there was something else going there, and I haven't actually talked about this on the podcast yet. But over the past like 9 months, I've noticed I was getting love handles, and I'm doing the Bulletproof diet right. This thing is rock solid for like years. It's just idiot proof. I'm like, okay, and some days they're worse than others, but like there's something going on. So I'd cut carbs, I'd add carbs, and I'd tweak things, and they just wouldn't go down. And they found I had blastocystis, which is a parasite that you pick up when you travel internationally a lot. And I'm like traveling all over the place.
Yep.
So I did a month of...
Everybody has blasto. Everybody.
I apparently had a lot of it, and I did a month of
Oh no.
a month of Flagyl, and like, oh my God, like my abs are back, and like my pants are falling off. It's that big of a difference from getting rid of this. So it's possible
Get rid of that after the RS?
That was after the RS. So, now I'm questioning maybe I should go back and like try a bunch more RS without blasting.
No. You need probiotics. If you took metronidazole, now you've annihilated all the good ones that you even had remaining.
Well, I take a ton of soil-based organisms. I'd use Prescript FX or other ones like that. But I'm down with taking more. I did try another brand that has the species I'm kind of afraid of, the ones that are really common, like Lactobacillus casei and Breve, ones that are histamine formers. And I took those, and I was like knocked out for like 3 days. Like,
yeah. You probably have to be careful, right? The balance is very important. There are some people with problems. Did you have any other abnormalities? Like, was the yeast off? They couldn't culture it on this ESA, so were they able to tell you anything?
Like you would expect for someone who has a history of massive amounts of Candida who's used fluconazole, there's small amounts of Candida cruzae present.
Okay, that's a problem.
It is a problem.
You know how to get rid of. Yeah, and after metronidazole, you just made it grow 10 times faster.
Not necessarily. Keep in mind, I'm on the Bulletproof diet. I'm taking caprylic acid, and I'm taking nystatin at the same time. So it's unlikely that it grew very much.
Well, did you know that actually a lot of fungi can use ketones as energy?
That's kind of interesting. And that is not something that I knew. Although I know that in the gut, that specifically brain octane, gut like bacteria hate, sorry, not gut bacteria, but gut fungus hate caprylic acid. So it tends...
when I had 4+ yeast, nothing worked.
Wow.
And when I went ketotic, it just didn't work. So
wow, this is interesting.
I think yeast is just really, they've evolved just as long as we have. They've been here longer than us. And our body temperatures make a big difference too. Like, they have, evolved ways to make our body temps go down by making us low thyroid. And it's really hard to change that. And even if you're 98.6, yeast, once it's established, they have these thick microfilms. So even, if you get the pH down with a lot of butyrate and whatnot, they are just really wily, clever little beasts.
So you got rid of your own yeast, and you lost 50 pounds, and, you healed your gut. And you told me something that was really cool. You used to be really sensitive to mold toxins, and you're really...
not anymore.
Yeah, and you're really sensitive to, like, gluten and things like that. And now you can, like, bathe in pizza, and you're totally good, right?
Well, no, right. No.
Okay.
I just don't get. I don't look 8 months pregnant. I might be like 1 or 2 months, but it's a huge improvement.
Okay, so your sensitivity went down, but you still have some sensitivity.
I have mercury still. I know. I'd love to talk to you more about this, but yeah, mercury's still a problem. But it takes a few years to chelate and get it out slowly, and gradually. So I'm okay living with what I have now. Like, if I don't sleep enough or club too hard, I have gut issues for a few days afterwards. It's a little hard to get back to norm. But in general, I had really good gut healing with using the right probiotics, getting rid of parasites like you. I had, I had the E. nana parasite, as well as some parasitic, some pathogenic bacterial overgrowth, the Morganella mordani. I mean, it's almost like admitting like a big old STD or something, which I never had. You have parasites, but they are so common, and these are the failures for resistant starch often, because I'm sure if I tried resistant starch earlier, I would have had problems, because I got bloated just eating celery, or looking. But once, I was able to shift the populations in my gut, I did not follow a GAPS diet, but I did do the fermented kraut that they recommend. I highly think that's helpful for people who can tolerate it without too much of the histamine.
It's funny because you talk about the GAPS diet. I was over at Donna Gates' house, and Donna wrote the Body Ecology Diet, which is basically the GAPS diet predecessor. And Donna's become a good friend, and she works a lot with autistic kids, and like, she's just such an amazing fountain of knowledge, and we just love geeking out on stuff like that. But I tried a fermented thing there, and I'm one of those people where I know most fermented foods have histamine in them, and I'm relatively sensitive to it. So she could like see it. She's like, "Oh, that one didn't work well for you," even though like the stuff she makes, like, it totally works on autistic kids all the time. And so I am used to being the corner case, but it's helpful because when you're the corner case, you like become aware of these little tweaks that work for other people, even though they aren't like as knocked down. It's still things that are like small roadblocks in the path to just performing better. But
exactly.
But okay, so you were able to tolerate this stuff. But what were the specific steps? So you got rid of your parasite, and then you took some probiotics. So I've taken like pig whipworm. I've taken, I don't know, $50,000 worth of parasites over the last 10 years, worth of parasites, worth of probiotics, which could be parasites depending if they're the wrong ones.
Yeah.
But I've had a lot of them over the years, and I know the ones that work for most people. And like, that's why I use the soil-based organisms primarily. What are the ones that you like, the ones that you've seen the most results with, the ones that people listening to this who have gut problems might want to switch to?
Oh, there's a whole bunch. I mean, ideally, playing in dirt is the best, healthy, organic, healthy dirt. But like the big kick-ass probiotic, Transcript Assist.
Okay, that's the one I take.
And then the other one, if you have read my blog, is the Clostridium-based ones. Mm-hmm. It's like GCBC, good calories, bad calories. We need good Clostridia to fight that bad Clostridia.
I used to take that for years, the strain from Japan that you had to order through Canada.
Oh, yeah, yes. That's how I got into it, right?
Okay, yeah. And I never, I gave up on it after a while, but it worked for you. Like, I think I took it for a year or two.
I had to get rid of my parasites before these really worked.
Okay, so now that I've gotten off all these flagell drugs, I guess I'll take a bunch more other types of exotic probiotics and maybe start eating more of this resistant starch and see what happens again. I would love to see it just magically work. I'm a little skeptical at this point. I think everyone who's on a low carb diet might consider this. I don't believe in a extensive low carb diet for long periods of time. It wrecks you. I did it for 3 months and I actually got much worse on a variety of things because I did 1 serving of vegetables a day. I was trying to do the Eskimo diet and, only subsist on mostly fat and a little bit of meat. And it just wrecked my sleep and it caused headaches and it was just a miserable time. And I did not benefit from that. In fact, I got food allergies from that, food allergies I'd never had before. So that biohack totally went wrong. It was just an experiment to see what would happen if you tried to live like an Eskimo. I did not predict that I would get these nasty food allergies. So I'm turning those around. But all right, your take is get rid of parasites, take resistant starch and a whole big handful of probiotics and do it for a while and get rid of mercury. And you're starting to sound like you've been to the Institute for Functional Medicine or something. But is that kind of the recipe you're talking about? I actually did certification with IFM. Oh, great. By the way, I love IFM. I'm not saying bad things there. I'm a fan of IFM, but you're starting to be like, okay, the recipe to fixing your gut is parasites, metals, yeast, probiotics, and resistant starch, and probably some other things like don't eat industrial animals and eat healthy foods and things like that.
Right. Going back to our roots.
Okay. So then, are you a low carb or not a low carb advocate, or a paleo advocate?
I can't. I broke my adrenals, so I can't do ketosis. Yeah, sorry.
You don't do ketosis even intermittently.
I can't. I started. You have to peel me off the wall. I don't feel well. Yeah, and then it takes me a few days to get over it.
Oh wow.
But after I healed my gut, I've been able to resume some of my little triathlon training. I can do 2-hour workouts again, no problem. But if I overdo it, then I'm almost into chronic. So I have to have to just kind of make sure I don't overdo things.
Into chronic fatigue syndrome. Have you ever played around with taking cortisol, like extra cortisol, in order to deal with that?
One time that was part of my protocol, but I think it made my gut worse because cortisol, just like whether it's from adrenal stress or from hydrocortisone or over-the-counter adrenal support. Yeah.
Okay, so
right. We tell people when they take steroids, try to take probiotics or take it with food. Don't, because it breaks the gut.
So your concern is that even like physiological amounts like 2.5 milligrams or 5 milligrams would have problems with what gut permeability?
I don't know. It depends on the person. Yeah, it's a steroid, and it lowers PG, and it's also even potentially like a Motrin or ibuprofen. Initially it helps with it, but over time you're preventing the healing prostaglandins, which we have to heal micro-ulcerations as well as ulcers. So some people, like the elderly, they have no pain and they have these huge ulcers because they're on the NSAID for arthritis or what they don't feel pain, and then their ulcers just getting bigger and bigger and worse until they have a bleed.
I've seen studies of prednisone in that, but I haven't seen anything about low dose straight like cortisone in that. But it's an interesting idea there, and it's cool because your background is pharmacology and plant biology, so you have a different point of view on a lot of this stuff, which I really appreciate. And I'm not saying that I know that either one of us is right or wrong, and I'm not even sure in some of these that we that you could say we agree or disagree. Like we're in the similar camps, but there's micro differences there.
Micro.
Yeah. Okay, so what are some of the
If
risks?
you're calling me a bitch, it's true. I totally am.
I haven't called anyone a bitch since I've done my 40 years of Zen training. Like I generally don't think about that, and if I do, it's usually a compliment. So,
It's okay.
what I do like though is that, especially on your blog, like you throw down the science and you're pretty much like, hey, this is the way it is, and I kind of like that Richard does the same thing. So you guys are both willing to stand up for what you think about. Now, what are some of the potential risks or downsides of just taking like, a cup of resistant starch and just, make a raw potato flour smoothie in the morning, choke it down, rinse it down with some Bulletproof coffee, and go about your business? Like, what's going to happen?
Well, first of all, the coffee is hot. I mean, I love the stuff. It tastes great.
Yeah, okay, fine. You don't rinse it down with coffee.
But you got to be careful. I mean, you got to be
drink
careful.
that in the morning. But okay, so let's say I just have this cold,
my
nasty
original
smoothie.
gut healing protocol.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I know. You really kind of. Well, I mean, my original little 7 steps, for ultimate gut health, had psyllium in it. But even with psyllium, I actually knocked it off. I don't really like it. It helps, But yeah, but people have to be careful. Cause an ischemic GI block obstruction that requires surgery, and people can die. So I actually took it out. I just don't like it.
Yeah.
But everything has a risk or benefit. You just have to weigh it. Every person is different and unique. It really, really has to be weighed. I mean, like all fiber, whether it's inulin, phos, and which is lovely, PGX for insulin sensitivity or weight loss. Any kind of fiber, we got to be careful, because whatever the pre-existing microbiota is, you can have great results, or you could be flaring arthritis and autoimmune issues, or you could be driving like this huge amount of cecum fermentation, and your body ain't gonna like it. It's gonna be uncomfortable. Some people have reported little cecum pains, or you have to proceed kind of start. I like to start low, go slow, and just see how it goes. First sign of any problem, kind of back off and let adjustments happen. There's an evolution in the gut. The gut is huge. It is a huge amount of real estate. Like it's a villa. It's a freaking island, like your Vancouver Island.
Mm-hmm. So I'm having a hard time like getting actionable stuff. Like, okay, so I might have bad stuff in my gut. One of the guys who did the original research with Richard about this, and I apologize, I'm not remembering his name, was one of his followers, found like this iceberg kind of algae, or so, not algae, an iceberg kind of bacteria in his gut. It's like, oh look, I got my gut biome back, and I have these weird things in there, but I'm eating tons of resistant starch, and I'm like, but what are the byproducts of that specific bacteria? And since no one knows what's in their gut, and everyone eats different stuff every day that changes what's in their gut, and specifically, I know that mycotoxins affect biotoxin and biofilm formation, so you get higher lipopolysaccharide of whatever's in your gut. How the heck would I know whether I should have a potato flour smoothie in the morning, or whether I should like completely not do that? Like,
Okay, all right. Okay, well, let me make first 2 corrections. That's Timothy Steele. He had the glacier bug, and
thank you.
To me, that's similar to actually Japanese. Like if you eat seaweed, you're going to eat seaweed bacteria, right? And seaweed bacteria know how to break down seaweed. You and I, we don't have porphinases, we don't have cellulases and blah blah blah. We don't have these enzymes in our core microbiome in our gut. We don't have the enzymes to break down seaweed usually, but the Japanese, they do. They found out that the gut microbiota harbored all these enzymes to break down seaweed. So we are what we eat based on the bacteria that we eat. So perhaps in where the glacier bugs help break down some of the vegetables, I don't know, that are around there. So that actually could be good or bad. I don't know. But looking at the kind of the taxonomy of the bugs in there, they're actually very, very favorable. For instance, James Adams, he did study actually, but they cultured the autism guts, and they found like a certain profile, fingerprint. When you do studies like this, or AMGUT, or even better is the Genova Diagnostics, because they use the 16S rRNA technology, then you can kind of get a fingerprint about what's going on. And James Adams found there were low levels of Veillonella and a strain called Coprococcus. And actually for Tim Gutz, I was breaking it down, and he had high levels of it. And he has, like, as far as I can tell, superficially, I mean, he doesn't have signs of autism or spectrum or anything. Unlike Richard and I, we're a little aspy.
Yeah, it kind of runs in the community, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it as a gift. It's a gift, yeah. But it is hard sometimes. And then, the second correction was that actually on the blog, I don't believe anywhere is it publicly advised to use an enema use of potato starch. Starch is the one that's the raw potato, has the high RS, not the flour. No one flour is just going to raise blood sugar. So if that's your intent, that's great. But actually in some medical terms,
straight potato starch though is highly processed starch that breaks down to glucose quickly.
No, starch, when you eat it raw, it doesn't break down to sugar.
But potato starch is already cooked, right?
No, it's raw.
Oh, interesting.
My kids made it. Kid actually, my oldest daughter, she actually did a little experiment. They made biodegradable plastic.
Oh, cool.
It's raw, yeah. They just, did different tapioca and blah, blah, and potato. They actually made some. Didn't turn out too well, even though they looked at YouTube and all that. But so it's highly refined. But it serves the purpose. A lot of probiotics will package with potato starch. It's totally GMP and blah, blah. It's really good for us. Fine. Unless you have I do believe certain people can have various issues, but again, it's probably based more on small intestinal intolerances and what's going on there.
Okay, cool. Interesting. You and I had talked offline about the concern that you might have, when you dry potatoes are one of the moldiest crops. And you do get these things like aflatoxin and ochratoxin and zearalenone and just this long thing. In fact, potatoes are one of the riskier crops to store because of this problem, as well as some of the other enzymes and metabolites that form in the potato skin. So there are other reasons to consider not eating potatoes as like a regular part of your diet, unless you don't have problems with the lectins and they're properly stored and all that. So I, just at my own expense, after you and I talked, I ran a test of a common brand of potato flour against not the most sensitive panel I used because that's really pricey, but against a relatively sensitive panel. And it came up with flying colors. Like there were no mold toxins at all in this starch specifically. Right.
For all the starches, they have to test. Yeah. There's a spec. Usually they have to have a certain level.
Not in the U.S. for most of them. There isn't a spec like that. It's
really?
It's incredibly simple. In fact, China has better levels. In fact, China, depending on the specific crop, but for many crops, China has more controls in place than the U.S. does when it comes to mold toxins. It's kind of amazing. You wouldn't expect that. But compared to Europe, Singapore, a lot of countries in South America, the U.S. just doesn't do it. And there's a reason sometimes that the lower quality crops end up here somehow.
Scary.
Okay, cool.
So did you check organic versus the popular brand? That's kind of...
this was a popular brand. I did not check an organic one. And it's weird because oftentimes organic can have more of these toxins than non-organic.
It can have more, right?
Yeah, because you spray these...
It's like organic vegetables. They could be parasites more just because they don't have those funky, nasty...
Exactly. And so, I'm a fan of eating organic. I recommend it, but there are risks, especially for things that are stored improperly that are organic. So, okay, so let's say someone listening to this is like, okay, I'm intrigued at this idea that maybe starch is good for me, or, some types of starch are good for me. So they could go out there and get some raw plantain flour. They get some potato starch, not flour, and just take it cold and just swallow it. How many times a day? How much should they take, and what should happen?
I think a good starting low dose for most people is like 1 tablespoon.
Okay.
There's depending on the certification, there's 8 to 12 grams of fiber, resistant starch fiber, and they could take it either morning or night. I prefer daytime in case there's adverse effects. They can monitor it rather than sleep on it. So I have seen, very, very, very few adverse effects. But if there's bloating or gas or very, very rarely rash or issues, just like psyllium, actually with psyllium, there's like a 10-20% rash or adverse effect for people, even asthma. So, it's better to a daytime, just like medications as well, or any food, a new food that someone's introducing. But probably better to look at it in the daytime. But 1 tablespoon is, not very much, and it's a good litmus test. Most people try it for a couple days. It's just like adding a new supplement. You add it and you kind of watch and monitor.
And so you do it in the morning, and would you do it like with other foods or just all by itself, or how would you go about it?
Well, since it's a food, either way, and you could do it with or without probiotics. I mean, that's not really matter. As you know, the SBO probiotics, they're spore-based, so they're not going to bloom and open until they hit like where there's food, so small intestines or the colon. It doesn't matter the timing as much.
Yeah, I recommend when people are trying this that they take probiotics with it, just so they're at the same place in the gut at the same time. Even though I did not have the results I'd hoped for from this, I'm actually willing to give it a try again. And it was actually Richard that suggested using the potato starch rectally. And it was interesting. I didn't get a rash that way. And it totally, I don't actually, on the Bulletproof diet, I don't get gas, since we're talking about poop and whatnot.
Yes, I am the gut goddess. Come tell me all your poop stories. I'd like to hear it.
So this has been like the day of all the podcasts I've worked on today have been like around, anything inside anything covered by your underwear. We're going to be talking about that. But it's kind of funny because, the gas is an issue, but I don't normally have gas at all. But if I go into a really moldy building and hang out there for a while, 2 days later, my gut's destroyed. Like it sheds its lining and I get like really bad gas. And I had that going on. And this happens to me like twice a year now, because when I go into a place like that, I leave and then I don't get the effects. But so I used this stuff. It just happened to be at that time I used, the rectal potato starch. And the problem went away within 10 minutes. And it was gone. It was permanently gone. And I was kind of blown away. So I know that it's a good idea to feed the bacteria.
You mean the environmental problem?
The bad gas that had come about.
The
stuff.
Yeah.
When you
now that you brought it up, rectally there have been butyrate. As you know, there's been butyrate enemas and suppositories. There's actually been potato starch or resistant starch rectally used suppositories for some medical use. Like after surgery for certain rectal surgeries, to see if the tail end works or not, they'll insert the starch actually, and there's some protection a little bit. So it's not totally unheard of. It's just not the normal way. But it's interesting that you had that result. I think it says something. It's maybe the low end of your gut is healthier than the front end, the small intestines. That's my theory.
It's entirely possible, and I'm inviting Richard on, of course, to talk about resistant starch as well, because he's the expert there, and I'm a fan. So I'm really looking to get to the bottom of this, so to speak, and understand A, why didn't it work for me, and B, there's something to it. I just I'm not sure what's going on.
Yeah. I can pin down so many wonderful results besides the ones that I've posted on my blog or in my comments. I've seen truly really fast autoimmunity disorder reversed in 4 to 6 weeks. People have all the autoantibody results. They're shocked. They can't believe it. And then clients and people at Free the Animal. We've had higher testosterone reported. We don't have a number yet, but these are just subjective findings from the commenters. And it's clearly, for me, it helped my adrenals. So anywhere someone's helping their adrenals, now you got an exogenous source of testosterone outside of your gonads, which is always good.
Yeah, no kidding. Who needs gonads?
Yeah,
oh, wait.
Because, no, they're so important. Because we don't need to be eunuchs. And a lot of times we're eunuchs because we have this huge stress because the gut is just so inflamed. And the gut, as you know, it's huge. It's like the size of Vancouver Island. Relative to the rest of our body. So we have to nurture it, take care of it, make sure the commensals are there. And that's the only problem I have with very low carb diets, because one Atkins study show by Duncan et al. In 2007, as soon as they went to zero carb, the really good butyrate producers went nowhere. They're gone, almost like an antibiotic, and butyrate production went straight down to a quarter, a fifth of production of the maintenance diet. And these are very, very important species. We need them. And they will crowd out yeast. They will crowd out pathogens, and they do their job to keep the small intestinal lining, epithelial tight junctions tight. And when they're not there, then we have a lot of problems. And also what they do is they break down cross feeders to feed on, like bifida.
Interesting.
We can eat all the inulin we want, but some of them, they're really fast degradators for resistant starch. And then they are very good at propelling out pathogens like your parasite and my parasite.
We'll say my former parasite, I killed that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but then now you took metronidazole, and now you've probably, introduced some, the opportunity for the opportunistic, pathogens are going to come.
Well, at the same time, probiotics and all as well. So it feels like that hasn't happened, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, the studies say otherwise.
Yeah.
Well, if you took the probiotics, that's a better protection. But we still need bifida and other ones, and they have to be fed. They need resistant starch and the oligos. So.
Well, I'm certainly not on a zero starch diet. I recommend that people cycle on and off, and have some starch have in the evening. So I've been conscious about feeding them, but at the same time, you don't want to feed yeast. And one of the things that's worked for years on the Bulletproof diet is, don't be in ketosis for long periods of time. That seems to be disastrous. And don't be out of ketosis for long periods of time if you want your brain to work. And lately, the addition of using the brain octane oil instead of just coconut oil, it just provides more ketones, so you get more coenzyme A and more beta hydroxybutyrate. So even in the presence of rice, like I pour brain octane on my sushi, so I'm getting the cold rice, I'm getting the resistant starch, but I'm also getting the ketones at the same time, and that's been kind of a glorious thing, especially when I travel on business. I might eat more rice when I'm traveling just because of the availability of food, but it tends to be in a way where I still have ketones present, so I can get the mental performance I'm looking for.
That's interesting. So when you eat the rice, do you flare up Candida or any issues?
Not at all.
Oh, okay. Then you should do okay. So that means you're getting a few grams of RS and other fiber, and maybe it's the dosing issue then.
It could be a dosing issue. It was kind of a
starting
mystery.
Low, going slow is often the best.
If anyone was going to get a placebo effect from resistant starch, it was me. I'm like, oh, this is great. Like, how cool is that? Everything's going to be good. And it totally didn't work. So I'm going to have Richard on, assuming he's willing. I'm sure he would. He's a cool guy, and he's totally reasonable about just discussing. And we'll see what his comments are, because I talked with Mark Sisson about it as well. And I feel like there's some meat on the bone here, so to speak, but I'm very concerned about whether the stuff that grows is the stuff you want. And certainly in the lower gut we see that, but aren't you going to feed yeast? That's a big question here as well. Like, if you take a bunch of resistant starch and you have Candida, what's going to happen?
Well, since you tolerate the sushi rice, okay, I think it won't cause a problem.
I do, but like for the average person with Candida, I also don't have Candida albicans. I have like a slow-growing, slow-moving species of Candida that's mostly been knocked down. Like Crusay is much less virulent than albicans, so it's like it's there, but it's not the big issue that albicans used to be for me. I used to be extremely yeasty.
Yeah, really. The chronic fatigue. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we really need to know what's in the gut. I mean, some people actually don't have enough E. coli. Like, for instance, I had chronic fatigue syndrome before. I had, oodles of microbial proteins probably crossing over into my brain and outnumbering, other natural proteins, whereas controls don't have this problem. And at the time, if I had probably taken resistant starch, I probably would have had issues. So it is very important to know what's in the gut and then do the appropriate seeding, feeding, and weeding. So now you've done the weeding, and it still kind of depends on what's in your small intestines. Hopefully you haven't grown, pathogens that would love to feed, on RS, like Klebsiella. Klebsiella is highly implicated in autoimmune arthritis issues. So we've seen a couple individuals, they have flares of their autoimmune arthritis. And they at one time, if they can tolerate some RS, they're pushing out pathogens. They can get really good results with that. But at the same time, they're going to have a little flare probably. Again, we have to know what's in the small intestines. It's very helpful because if the weeding can happen prior to massive, prebiotic dosing, it helps. But again, it depends on the person. What's the point of risk and benefit? Some people can still benefit that I've seen. Like among my clients. But again, just depends on the person.
That is, that's a kind of the core of biohacking there, where you can look at what works for a lot of people and you can try it out and you can see, did it work for me? Yes or no? And that's, at the end of the day, that's kind of what matters. So if you're tracking your data and you're tracking your results and you give it a try, it's the willingness to experiment and then willingness to look at the results objectively versus what you want them to be. In my case, I certainly wanted the RS, resistant starch results, for me to be, oh, cool, like, look, gluten doesn't matter anymore. Although I honestly don't think that, I don't think there's good evidence that anyone should be eating gluten. But especially on a regular basis. But aside from that, I would just like to be able to know that, I'm less sensitive to stuff that I've been sensitive to for essentially my whole life. So like, let's turn that down. There's another question though, that I'd like to ask you, because we're coming up on the end of the interview. And it's a question that every guest answers, and it's, what are your top 3 recommendations for people who want to perform better just in all walks of life? So this isn't just about resistant starch or about your work, but just your whole life. If you have 3 pieces of advice you could share, what are they?
Oh, wow. Well, this year for me, I'm focusing on actually dreaming big, and to laughing more. I think this synchronizes our gut, and you do that really great, Dave. So I think it's a great gut buster. Yeah, I mean booster. The third, wow, an all-time favorite tip. I don't know. Let's see. I think it's important to zen out. A lot of us don't, but that's one of my challenges, actually. Yeah, I started some yin yoga since
Cool.
I've been here in China. Yeah, huge life change for me. So that's it. Thanks
Awesome.
for having me on.
Grace, it's always a pleasure. Next time you're back in the Bay Area on one of your trips, let me know. And I will, if I'm in the Bay Area as well at the same time, I would love to sit down with you at Berks and have another steak and see if Richard and anyone else from the community down there, maybe we can get Gary Taubes to come down from Berkeley, or Chris Kresser or Sarah Gottfried or someone. Those are all people I know and respect. So we'll have a good old-fashioned biohacker, eat a lot of meat and maybe drink a lot of potato starch kind of dinner.
I'll leave the potato starch at home and just go for the red wine. Cool.
I like it. Have an awesome evening.
A lot of people don't realize that I went to a great deal of effort to make Keurig-compatible coffee cartridges. This means that if you have one of those machines that can take a K-cup, you can use the Bulletproof coffee cartridges in the same machine. You can check those out on upgradedself.com.
See the head of foam that's formed on it? This is similar to what you get with a latte. There are actually little bubbles still coming to the surface, just like a freshly steamed latte, but the flavor is something that you wouldn't expect. It is creamier and more delicious than a latte ever has a chance of being,